It feels like every year we get more and more movie sequels, and 2024 has been no exception. So here's my picks for movie sequels that were surprisingly good versus ones that were very disappointing. And starting off, we got to go back to the beginning of the year with Kung Fu Panda 4 because this is a pretty big disappointment for me, and I actually have this movie rated higher than a lot of other people. I think it's around a 6 out of 10, but that's such a disappointing number from a franchise that has been so consistently great, especially those first two Kung Fu Panda movies are easily 8 or 9 out of 10s. Kind of just feels like a great value brand movie in comparison to the other Kung Fu Panda movies. Not having the Furious 5 in it was a huge misstep. Awkwafina's character in this movie is definitely not a good replacement for them in my opinion, and even the things that they had right, like a great villain in the Chameleon, doesn't have enough screen time for you to actually care about her. Switching things to a positive note, Beetlejuice was such a pleasant surprise. Having a sequel over 30 years after the original is always a risky move, but I feel like this was the perfect one, and honestly, I like it better than the first Beetlejuice movie. Yes, the movie is admittedly a little overstuffed with so many different characters and plot lines going on, but I honestly kind of don't care because of how much fun I had with this movie. I think it's honestly one of the funniest films of the year. It also looks amazing. Tim Burton has his style all over this thing. Lots of really fun lighting, especially in the afterlife, just makes this so beautiful to look at. I also just thought all the newcomers like Jenna Ortega and others blended in so perfectly with the original cast. They just had such great chemistry, and like I said, I wasn't the biggest fan of the Beetlejuice movie, so I was really surprised how much I like this. I do have a full review of this on my channel if you want to check it out after this video. You knew it was coming. Despicable Me 4, absolute disappointment and just a travesty of a movie altogether. Now listen, I understand I'm older than the target demographic for this movie, but I still enjoy some of the Despicable Me movies, especially the first one I think is a genuinely great kids film, and this one just felt so lazy and lifeless in my opinion. Sorry, it's just so evident watching this movie that they had absolutely no ideas for what to do for a fourth Despicable Me, but they know these things print money, so they just had to come up with the most bare bones things imaginable. It's honestly just disrespectful in my opinions. Kids deserve better movies. This was just not it. It's a good year to be a legacy sequel though, because Twisters was another pleasant surprise. Now I actually had never seen the first Twister movie until like a week before this thing released, so I really had absolutely no expectations, and even after watching the first Twister I was like, oh well, this thing's probably going to just be like a lifeless sequel that's just trying to cash in on the legacy of that movie. But no, this was actually really good and stands alone on its own from the original. Like, no, it's not a cinematic masterpiece in any way, shape, or form, but it is a ton of fun at the movies. Glenn Powell and Daisy Edgar Jones have incredible chemistry in my opinion. The soundtrack was a blast, and you just got to watch these people chasing tornadoes. It was such a fun time in the theaters. What might be my hottest take of the year, Alien Romulus, was a disappointment to me, even though I think this is again like a 6 out of 10. It's an enjoyable enough film. I just don't think there's anything that really makes it specifically great, which is apparently a crime to say on the internet nowadays because everything either has to be the greatest thing ever or the worst thing ever. This just falls flatly in the middle in my opinion. It does have an amazing third act, I'll give it that, but I'm sorry, first of all, this movie takes way too long to get into anything somewhat exciting or scary, and most of the stuff I didn't end up finding that scary anyways, even though I'm normally the easiest scare when it comes to horror movies. I also thought a lot of the supporting cast members outside of Kaylee Spaney and David Johnson, they were both incredible in this movie, but everybody else is just so forgettable. And it's also way too much of a greatest hits of the previous Alien films that have came before, and it made me just think, hey, I'd rather be watching those right now rather than this. I had absolutely no idea when I went to go see Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes it was gonna rival the modern Planet of the Apes Caesar trilogy and become one of my favorite movies of the entire year, but that's what happened. This thing's still in my top 5 favorites of the entire year. It was such a pleasant surprise. The movie knows it's not going to replicate the amazingness of Caesar, so it smartly gives us Noah as our new protagonist, and he's completely different than Caesar. He's not a natural leader in any way, shape, or form, but that's what makes him so interesting. May as the only human I thought was great. Freya Allen is truly going to be a great movie star in the future. I absolutely adored Raka, the orangutan on the right here. He was one of my favorite supporting performances of the entire year, and this movie helms one of the greatest villain performances of the year in Proxima Caesar. Kevin Durant went so incredibly hard on this performance. The voice acting was just on a different level, honestly. So many quotable lines. And the movie is truly gorgeous to look at. Not only is the ape CGI incredible, the scenery also, there's just so many great wide shots. It honestly kind of reminded me of some of the early Lord of the Rings, just shots of them walking around, and it's just amazing. I think we need some back-to-back positivity. Bad Boys Ride or Die was another huge surprise because I thought Bad Boys 3 was a pretty bad movie. It was easily the worst of the three at the time, and I thought this franchise has completely run out of steam, and this was just going going to be milking it for all I had left. No, this ended up actually being a true return to form while also adding a lot of new stuff into the franchise. I think the action direction is incredible in this. There's so many just entertaining action scenes in this movie. Martin Lawrence and Will Smith's chemistry was just as good as ever, and Martin Lawrence in particular I thought was absolutely hilarious throughout this entire movie, and this was just an absolute blast. I'm so happy that this franchise is back and thriving again, and I hope we get a fifth one. I don't even feel like I want to talk about it, but I have to put MegaMind versus the Doom Syndicate on here, and I'm not gonna lie, I didn't have expectations for this ever since we got the trailer for this, and it looked absolutely horrible. You know I'll take any opportunity to dunk on this movie because it's just such a fumble. If you ever told me in the past that we were getting a sequel to MegaMind, I would have been so ecstatic about it, and somehow this ended up being one of the worst movies I've seen in the last few years. I feel like everybody already forgot that Ghostbusters Frozen Empire came out this year, and rightfully so. I didn't even like Ghostbusters Afterlife, so I was just hoping this was going to be an okay average movie, and I would have been happy, honestly. And honestly, it didn't even meet those expectations. I think this franchise has fully run out of steam like the Bad Boys hasn't. Ghostbusters is done for at this point. There's also simply way too much going on in this movie. So many different characters, so many different storylines. It feels like it should have been a TV show. And while Beetlejuice does have a similar issue, Beetlejuice was at least a lot of fun that it kind of cancels it out. This movie was just not fun. It was dull, lifeless, and it's just done for. Inside Out 2 was super surprising because I didn't expect this to be better than the first one, but honestly, I think that's where I'm standing on this now. I think this is an improvement. It doesn't hit as deep emotionally as the first one does, but it does improve in a lot of other ways. I think the portrayal of anxiety as a character is so incredible in this as kind of like the antagonist, and it's honestly probably one of the best portrayals of anxiety in a movie I've ever seen. All the other new emotions are truly great as well, and this movie is really genuinely funny. The humor was upped a lot. We also get to spend a lot more time with Riley outside of her head, and I think that really benefited this movie, and I hope they keep that style going forward if we get an Inside Out 3. That was a lot of sequels, and we've still got a lot more coming out with things like Joker 2, Gladiator 2 at the end of the year, so don't worry, I'll make an updated list at the end of the year. But as of right now, let me know in the comments your biggest surprise and disappointing movie sequel in the comments below.